The film Julie and Julia received much critical acclaim, including a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress. The front of the DVD cover reads as follows: "A scrumptious feast, the feel-good movie of the year." That's from Kevin Steincross of Fox TV. While this film is a delight to watch and a treat for the senses, it is also a film about two real women with real challenges. Module 5 of our course this semester was an eye-opener for me, and in this video essay I'll explore the elements of conflict and tension in the 2009 film Julie and Julia. But first, let's set the stage. Here's a little background information about the two main characters as well as writer Nora Ephron. Julie Powell is the author of the book Julie and Julia, an adaptation of the blog in which she chronicled her journey to cook her way through every recipe in Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking. The sometimes bubbly, sometimes bratty Julie is played by Amy Adams. The real-life Julie passed away in 2022 after battling COVID-19. Julia Child once needed no introduction. She was famous not only for her magnum opus, Mastering the Art of French Cooking, but also for her presence on television as one of the first celebrity chefs. Child is played by Meryl Streep, who was outfitted with especially large shoes to make her appear taller, as Child was 6'2". Julia and her husband Paul moved to Paris in 1948. She fell in love with the city and the cuisine, and this set her on a path to culinary greatness. Nora Ephron wrote the screenplay and directed the film. She was also one of the producers. The DVD of Julie and Julia includes a featurette in which Ephron is described as a foodie. She also wrote Heartburn, a 1983 novel whose narrator is a food writer. Now for the stories, or at least the parts marked by conflict. The film opens with the Childs arriving in Paris. Julie is delighted by everything she encounters and compares their new home to Versailles. The only slightly objectionable thing about the place is that the bed is too short for her. Moments later, we see, in contrast, the Powells driving to their new home in Queens, New York. The first words uttered by Julie are, "Is this a mistake?" The borough and the apartment are less than lovely, and Julie immediately runs into trouble trying to fit everything into the cramped kitchen. The next day, Julie walks and takes public transit to her job, passing a 9/11 memorial on the way. In her cubicle, she answers calls from people affected by the attacks on the World Trade Center. The callers are understandably upset, and Julie does her very best to help them. After work, she passes a window display with a chocolate fountain, and this gives her the idea to make a chocolate cream pie. She says to her husband, "I love that after a day when nothing is sure, you can come home and absolutely know that if you add egg yolks to chocolate and sugar and milk, it will get thick. It's such a comfort." Later, Julie meets three friends for lunch. She is no longer able to relate to these women, all of whom are successful, self-important, and patronizing. One of them, Annabelle, asks to interview Julie for an article. The title turns out to be, "Is 30 the New 20? Portrait of a Lost Generation," and in it, Julie is described as follows: Julie Powell, the one we all knew would be the one, temped for 8 years before giving up on her novel, and now works in a cubicle as a mid-level bureaucrat. Later in the film, there's a delicious exchange over dinner in the Powell's apartment with their friend Sarah. Julie: "What do you think it means if you don't like your friends?" Sarah: "It's completely normal." Eric: "Men like their friends." Sarah: "We're not talking about men. Who's talking about men?" To cope with all this, Julie cooks. Gradually, she and Eric arrive at an idea that Julie should write a blog about cooking as an escape from work and other stressors. Julie remarks, rightly or not, that she never finishes what she starts. So she sets a goal and a deadline for herself. to cook her way through the entirety of Mastering the Art of French Cooking in 1 year. That's 524 recipes. In her first post, she writes, "Risking my marriage, my job, and my cat's well-being, I have signed on for a deranged assignment." Meanwhile in France, life for the Childs is a dream. Still, Julia observes, "Wives don't do anything here. It's not me." She tries a number of activities that turn out not to be a good fit. Eventually, she gets the idea to attend culinary school at Le Cordon Bleu. All the while, she searches for French cookbooks in English but finds none, and this point is driven home when her husband presents her with an impressive volume on cooking, in French, of course. We're back in Queens, and the Julie and Julia project is in full swing. Julie's mother calls, expresses concern about the whole situation, and even encourages Julie to quit. She says to her mother, "I have to finish. It's all I've got." When the phone call is over, her husband says, "It's not all you've got." And this is the first inkling of tension between the two. It's Julia's first day at Le Cordon, and she is already bored with the basic class in which she was placed. She asks the school's proprietor, Madame Brassard, to study with the more advanced culinary students. She is met with stern resistance, but is ultimately allowed to enroll. Julia's first day in the advanced class, however, is disheartening. She says to her husband, "You should have seen the way those men looked at me, as if I was just some frivolous housewife looking for a way to kill time." She practices her knife skills all night and proves herself in class the next day. Tensions between Julie and Eric simmer because Julie is too busy to spend the kind of time with her husband that he would like. He begins using the word obsessed to describe her, and even calls her at work complaining, "Too much food, not enough sex." And we're back in France where Julia is at a party complaining to her female companions that she can't get Madame Brassard to schedule a final examination. Julia wants badly to get her diploma, and her new friends encourage her to pressure Brassard by claiming that the American ambassador himself is very interested in her taking the test. Brassard purposefully gives Child a difficult test to write from memory the recipes for several obscure dishes. Child has to take the test a second time. She passes even after Brassard says, "You have no real talent for cooking, but the Americans will never know the difference." Things go noticeably downhill as Julie becomes frustrated with her project, specifically the section of Child's book on aspics. The sink in her kitchen backs up. She yells, "I hate it here," and she has a meltdown. There's a lot of tension, and she and Eric have a spat. Julia starts teaching with her friends Simone and Louisette, collectively called Les Trois Gourmands. In this part of the film, the groundwork is laid for conflict between Louisette and the other two. In short, she is not nearly as industrious as her colleagues. The Childs welcome Julia's sister Dorothy to Paris. The siblings talk about their father, John McWilliams, and how disappointed he must be that they didn't, quote, "marry Republicans and breed like rabbits." Dorothy warns Paul against discussing politics with her father during an upcoming visit, noting that he is a fan of Senator Joseph McCarthy. Dorothy ends up getting married while her father is in France, but Mr. McWilliams is not amused by any of it. Paul puts the kibosh on escalating tensions during the wedding reception by asking Julia to dance and leaving the table. Newly married, Dorothy returns home to the States. Soon Julia receives a letter saying that her sister is pregnant. Naturally, she pretends to be thrilled, but the news causes her to break down crying. The reason is not made clear in the film, but we understand that she, Julia, is unable to have a child. Simone and Louisette have been working on an English-language cookbook, but have run into trouble with their publisher. They ask Julia to help them rework the book so that it is more suitable for the American market. Julie Powell is now busily preparing to host a very distinguished dinner guest, Judith Jones, the woman at Knopf Publishing who recognized Julia Child's book for the masterpiece it was. Disaster strikes when Julie sleeps through her cooking timer, burning the meal. The next day, she feigns illness, skips work, and makes the meal again. Unfortunately, Judith Jones does not come to dinner because of poor weather. Julie is crushed. Eric tries to lighten the mood, but this irritates her. He finally expresses some of his frustrations, saying, "Your readers will survive, and when this year is over, and I cannot wait until it is, your readers will somehow get on with their lives." He calls her self-centered. They have a big fight. Eric leaves the apartment, and it is unclear when or if he will return. The next day at the office, Julie is confronted by her boss. He says, "Anyone else would fire you. A Republican would fire you. I'm not a schmuck." Changes in the political climate mean that the Childs have to leave Paris. Julia writes, "I'm having a hard time pretending to be anything but devastated. On top of this, Paul is called to Washington, D.C. and is interrogated." Of the ordeal, Julia writes, "We've been through our own version of Kafka. Paul came home exonerated but thoroughly bruised." Eventually, Julia and Simone decide to confront Louisette about her lack of effort on the cookbook. Louisette then drops the bomb that she is getting a divorce, and everything is retracted. Later, and in the US, Julia and Simone are asked to rework their entire cookbook if they want a chance at being published by Houghton Mifflin. They comply, but the publisher rejects the book. One of the funniest moments of the film is when Paul, and this is immediately after Julia calls him the sweetest man, says, "Fuck them." After Julie gains notoriety for her blog, she finds out that Julia Child herself made comments about it. In the film, we do not learn what Child said, but I had to know, so I looked it up. Speaking to the LA Times, Child said, "Well, she just doesn't seem very serious, does she? I worked hard on that book. I tested and retested those recipes for 8 years so that everybody could cook them, and many people have. I don't understand how she could have problems with them. She just must not be much of a cook." This destroys Julie, of course, but Eric is there to help her put things in perspective. "Eric, look, there's something wrong with Julia if she doesn't get what you're doing." "Julie, there's nothing wrong with her, nothing. I've spent a year with her. She's perfect." "Eric, the Julia Child in your head is perfect. The Julia Child who doesn't understand what you're doing is not perfect. The one in your head is the one that matters." "Julie, she saved me." "Eric, you saved yourself." Ultimately, both women overcome their respective challenges and achieve wonderful things. On a side note, in the end of the film, the Powells visit Julia Child's kitchen. Yes, her actual kitchen transported from her home in Cambridge at the National Museum of American History. I too saw this kitchen in 2011 at the museum. When I started work on this project, I considered a number of subjects, such as scene transitions, the parallel timelines, character profiles, the music, the story arc, but as I took more notes and started to write, it became clear what my focus would be. In Module 5, we learned that conflict is a necessity, and every scene must have one. Conflict and dramatic tension drive the stories in Julie and Julia as they do in every story. I hope that my video has given you a new perspective on the film. In closing, I want to quote a bit from Julie's blog. She writes, "I've been thinking about me and Julia. She was a secretary for a government agency, and I am too. A really nice guy married her. A really nice guy married me. Both of us were lost, and both of us were saved by food in some way or other." And with that, I'd like to say thank you for watching and listening, and bon appétit!